Welcome, friends, to the monthly seminar series from the Center for Indic Studies. Today is a very auspicious day in the Hindu calendar, day of Diwali. So happy Diwali to all of you. The flip side of it is that many of our regular attendees from India, they told me they would not be able to attend today because it's such a festive time, Diwali evening. Anyway. So we are looking at a topic that is very appropriate for the season, the feminine divine, the Devī. We had Durgā Puja a couple of weeks ago, and in Durgā Puja, the main text that many people recite that season is another Puran, the Markandeya Puran, popularly known as the Durgā Saptashati or the Chandi. And many people, as I said, they recite the Chandi at this time. And in Chandi, we have a very famous shloka from the Chandi, which some people believe is more powerful than another very famous shloka in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glani. So whenever there is a kind of rise of unrighteousness, I manifest. But in the Chandi, the Devi is even more direct. And she says, Itham yada yada badha danavotha bhavishyati tada tadavatirya karishami harisanksham. So I destroy my foes or your foes, on the foes on your behalf. So much more direct. So the tradition of Devi in Hindu mythology and in Hindu texts, starting from the Upanishads, is very strong, very potent. And when we talk of Purana, of course, by Puranas we mean a corpus of Sanskrit texts. But there is another very popular definition of Purana, which is called Pura Api Nava. That means it is ancient and yet at the same time modern, because it does speak to our modern challenges and problems, how to address them. So today, as I said, is Diwali. Diwali is also Kālī Puja in many parts of India. And again, Kālī is again a very powerful iconography of the Shakti, the Devī. Sometimes people become a little repelled by it, the severed hands and the garland of skulls and all that. But Kālī also has this form, benign form, where she gives you abhaya. That means freedom from fear. And in the Upanishads also, we find some references of Kālī. For example, in the Mundaka Upanishad, it says, Kālī Karali cha manojavacha sulohita yacha dhumra varna, the dark complexion. So very strong tradition in the Puranas. And today, Jeff will speak to us about a different Purana, the Devīpurāṇa. And I will request Belaji. Belaji is our seminar coordinator. I will request Belaji to formally introduce Jeff. Belaji, over to you.
Thank you so much. Happy Diwali, everyone. What a auspicious occasion today. And on this occasion, we are going to benefit from Professor Jeff's spiritual and philosophical insights. Professor Jeff is the South Asian Studies Librarian and Assistant Director of the Zilberman Family Center for Global Collections at the University of Pennsylvania, where he oversees one of North America's leading South Asia collections. I don't know how you do that, Jeff, but it's just so impressive, your work. And I came to know you through CONSALT, which is the Committee on South Asian Libraries and Documentation. And maybe I even knew through SACAP, which is the South Asian Cooperative Acquisitions Program of the Library of Congress, where I used to work. So I know the University of Pennsylvania has a tremendous Indic studies culture, as well as a lot of books on it. And I'm sure you are the man behind all that. So Very impressive indeed. And in Professor Japp's role as Assistant Director of the Zilberman Center for Global Collections, Jaff helps guide a team of area studies librarians in building globally oriented collections and delivering specialized research services too. So I don't want to take too much of your time, though I would love to talk about Jaff for the entire webinar. I mean, it's very difficult to say so much about him in so few words, especially for a person like me who loves words. But before taking too much of the webinar's time, I'm sure we will get to know him also through his presentation, and we will have a question and answer session after that, Jeff. So take it away.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for such a kind introduction. Let me get my slides up. Okay. Seeing the slides all good? Okay, great. So really, thank you for being here with me today and giving me a chance to share my research a little bit. This research on the Śākta Purāṇas. This is research I don't get to as much these days as I would like to because of all of these library activities that I get involved in. But I have a real passion for the Śākta Purāṇas. This is a body of mostly pre-modern Sanskrit texts that are centered on Devī, the goddess. And this is research I began pursuing during my doctoral dissertation work, which focused on the Devīpurāṇa. This is a somewhat understudied text that plays a crucial role or holds a crucial position in shaping understandings of the feminine divine within the Puranic tradition. My dissertation involved translating about 2,000 Sanskrit verses from the Devīpurāṇa, which overall is more than 5,000 verses. But I drew out the narrative portions of the texts and translated those 2,000 verses while also drawing from commentary in Bengali and Hindi, and then worked on analyzing those 4 primary narrative arcs of the text. So my research also examines the intertextual dialogue across a number of Śākta Purāṇas, so not just the Devīpurāṇa, but situating the Devīpurāṇa within the entire corpus, looking closely at how the narratives fit into a wider narrative network, how they're speaking to and reshaping one another across time in these different texts. And one of the central questions that I consider is how the goddess, who initially is celebrated as a powerful and autonomous figure, becomes increasingly incorporated into a more patriarchal Brahmanical religious framework. And while her power remains immense throughout these various narrative iterations, her freedom to act becomes increasingly circumscribed by male authority through these traditional texts. And here just have an image of Mahishasura Mardini, the slayer of the buffalo demon. This is a really prominent goddess narrative. We'll be talking a little bit more as we go through the talk today. The Puranas as a genre are especially important, and I find them really fascinating in this history because they're the first major Sanskrit texts that do place the goddess as a real center of theological thought. So these texts aren't just featuring divine women. Some of them are completely devoted to elevating a supreme feminine being, the Mahadevi, the great goddess who transcends all other beings. And this is particularly striking, given that much of the earlier Sanskrit religious literature had really reflected more patriarchal structures and patriarchal values. I also find the Puranas really fascinating because they do continually retell the same stories over and over. And they're retelling these stories in different ways. They're telling them through different periods and in varied sociocultural contexts. So, for example, we have the Devī Mahatmya or the Durgā Saptashati, which was mentioned earlier, which is a really foundational text for goddess worship. And this text, which is sort of mid-first millennium, is then retold not just once, but twice in the much later Devī Bhagavata Purāṇa, which is more of a sort of later medieval text. And so it's very curious, why retell this text again, and why retell it not just once, but twice? And these retellings aren't just repetitions. These changes between versions, which can be sometimes quite bold and sometimes very subtle, do provide us clues about shifting religious ideas, shifting regional practices, and they reveal some negotiations between orthodox and popular traditions, which the Puranas are a real hallmark of, this nexus of the orthodox and the popular. My approach to these texts involves combining intratextual reading, meaning analyzing how a single text is really developing a sort of unified narrative vision, and combining that with an intertextual comparison, which is examining how stories and theological claims are shifting across the entire corpus. So the intratextual analysis reveals ways in which the text is speaking internally amongst itself and its narrative fragments, while the intertextual consideration is examining how these very texts are speaking amongst one another, sort of readopting narratives and reshaping them to reveal something new, to reveal distinct visions. And thereby the intertextuality is really embedding historical developments within this broader textual record. And the analysis helps us trace how these stories and these images of the goddess are evolving and how they're shifting, and how these shifts are reflecting broader cultural and theological trends. Before delving into the Puranic vision, however, I do want to contextualize just a little bit within this pre-modern literary world. So prior to the middle of the first millennium, goddesses had mostly manifest in subsidiary roles within the South Asian religious literature. While there were probably goddess-oriented practices going on in the literature, the goddesses were more subsidiary. And the earliest strata of religious texts in South Asia, the Vedas, these are largely focused on hymns and their ritual interpretation. And for the most part, the Vedas are positing these hymns towards a male dominant pantheon. But we do find mention of goddesses in the Vedic literature. So we have these mention of goddesses with an emphasis on generative power. So we have an example here, Ushas, the dawn, who presents a vision of youthful beauty. Like a dancing girl, she puts on bright ornaments. She uncovers her breast as a cow reveals her swollen udder. Creating light for the whole universe, dawn has opened up the darkness as cows break out from their enclosed pen. So here we have this goddess, we have Ushas, who's attractive, she's pleasant, she brings good fortune. Similarly, we have the characterization of Vach, or the goddess speech, who's compared with a divine wife here. One who looked did not see speech, another who listens does not hear it. It reveals itself to someone as a loving wife, beautifully dressed, reveals her body to her husband. So in this verse, we see the early stages of a very longstanding and ongoing association of speech with the feminine divine, and here tapping into the procreative potential of speech, and ultimately making this connection with wife and motherhood. So while these figures are notable, it's notable that there are goddesses present here. They don't hold a central theological position. They're part of a male-dominant cosmic order, and they're valued primarily for these kind of generative powers. We see similar dynamics in the material culture of this early period, and we have sculptural depictions that are often emphasizing goddesses' capacity for beauty and creation, thereby underscoring really the dominance of the feminine divine in domestic roles, and in roles of nurture, attraction, creation. These visual representations reinforce the idea of the feminine divine as powerful, but in these more generative capacities. So here, for example, we have an example of the lotus-headed fertility goddess, Jagaddhātrī, portrayed in this 6th century miniature sculpture from Madhya Pradesh in central India. She's shown here in a birthing posture, but without a pregnant belly, which is interesting. And then in place of a head, she has this lotus flower that's further emphasizing this association with fertility, really underscoring that the feminine divine body is this embodiment of life-affirming forces. So even in these early portrayals, the feminine divine is imagined as a source of energy, a source of fecundity, and as an auspicious being, though not yet, we don't have examples yet of the goddess being a real sovereign power. But these early images and these narratives lay the groundwork for how the feminine divine later becomes imagined and to a degree transformed in the later Śākta traditions, becoming both nurturing and dangerous, both beautiful and powerful. So in the early classical period, new and striking portrayals of the feminine divine begin to appear in the Sanskrit corpus. These are figures that depart from the earlier Vedic vision of the auspicious nurturing goddesses, and instead they highlight a powerful tension between beauty and ferocity. Some of the most notable early examples of the sort of grotesque goddess, I should say literary examples, stem from the Mahabharata, with one narrative likely dating to about the 1st century CE. In this episode in the Mahabharata, a group of goddesses called the Matrikas, the little mothers, and keep these in mind, we'll talk about them more later, are sent by the god Indra to kill the divine child Kartikeya. But as these Matrikas approach the boy, their breasts begin to flow with milk, and they ask to adopt Kartikeya instead. He agrees to become their adopted son, and he grants their request to be recognized as goddesses throughout the world. So we now have this equation of these terrible Matrikas as mothers. But he also underscores and agrees to their request that they be allowed to feed on human children. And he declares, in your various forms, may you torment children until they reach 16 years old. I grant you an imperishable, violent nature. So again, this kind of overlaying. So unlike the earlier Vedic goddesses, these Matrikas are fierce, grotesque, and they're liminal. They haunt trees, crossroads, caves, mountains, springs, cremation grounds. They're at the edge of society. And their incorporation into Brahmanical religion likely reflects an adaptation of powerful, meaningful, non-Brahmanical female deities that these groups are coming into contact with and bringing them into the Orthodox fold, really signaling a bit of a shift, pretty dramatic shift in how divine femininity is imagined. And so here just have some examples demonstrating this kind of continuum of goddess typologies, where on the left you have this kind of erotic vision, very beautiful, enticing, and then on the right, the very grotesque, the violent, the frightening, and those visions are compatible, become increasingly compatible. It wasn't until the rise of the Puranas in the early centuries of the Common Era that the goddesses were elevated to new positions of prominence in Sanskrit literature. And so the Puranas are renowned for bringing together local religious practices, popular myths, and the kind of orthodox social structure. So this expansive genre is really helping to integrate the feminine divine into the Brahmanical sphere, and it's elevating the goddess to positions of theological prominence. As previously mentioned, the earliest and most influential of these goddess-centered texts is the Devī Mahatmya, Durgā Saptashati, Chandi. This is composed roughly around the 6th century CE. This is the glorification of the goddess. This Sanskrit text is the first to present the goddess as a universal supreme power. It really sort of shows up on the scene suddenly and elevates the goddess to this supreme position of prominence. Here she's depicted as a fierce warrior. She's leading battles against all these various demon armies who the male gods can't defeat. And its narratives are really celebrating her exploits in combat. These narratives are interspersed with hymns that develop a very powerful theology that are centered on her divine authority, so really elevating her. So the text is drawing on Vedic epithets, and it's drawing on familiar mythological frameworks, but it's portraying this all in a new light. It's portraying the female warrior deity as a striking innovation, again, likely influenced by these extra-Brahmanical religious traditions. So through this careful blending of the local and the orthodox, the Devī Mahatmya is legitimizing and incorporating these previously marginal narratives into the mainstream corpus. And in so doing, it's really setting a lasting template for the ongoing depictions of Devī in later textuality and in later practice. While many Puranas do acknowledge the feminine divine, often emphasizing goddesses in their roles as powerful consorts of major male deities, only a more limited subset of texts fully elevates the goddess to a supreme theological status. So apart from the Devī Mahatmya in the Markandeya Purana, most of the Śākta narratives are preserved in the so-called Upa-Purāṇas, or quote-unquote minor Puranas, which have historically received a little bit less attention. So we have a distinctive group of 8 texts, largely of Bengali provenance, that constitutes the recognized corpus of Śākta Upa-Purāṇas. On the left, we have 4 that have been translated and received a reasonable amount of attention. These are the Kālī Purāṇa, Mahabhagavata Purāṇa, Devī Bhagavata Purāṇa, and Devī Rahasya. And then on the right, we have 4 texts that have received less attention and really sort of open up more opportunities for further study and understanding. These include the Devīpurāṇa, the Bhagavati Purāṇa, the Chandi Purāṇa, and another Kālī Purāṇa. So, really delving into the Devīpurāṇa during my research was providing this opportunity to provide further research into Śākta belief, history, and practice, really kind of bringing more into the conversation. So my research centering on the translation and study of the Devīpurāṇa really focused on this text that is exalting the feminine divine and articulating a notably distinct theological vision. So it is sort of continuing on from the Devi Mahatmya, but it is reshaping in new ways. So the Śākta Purāṇas are all drawing from a shared reservoir of mythological narratives. As I said before, these texts are all retelling narratives again and again. But each text is employing this common narrative vocabulary in distinct ways. And this can reveal quite nuanced perspectives on what the goddess's role is, what the goddess's significance is. So positioning the Devīpurāṇa within this broader intertextual landscape highlights its central concern, which I argue is establishing a dualistic theological framework in which feminine power is ultimately harnessed to serve male-centered purposes. This shift marks an early stage in a broader textual and theological trend, one that's seeking to domesticate the fierce feminine energies that had been brought into the corpus in the Devi Mahatmya. The goddess of the Devīpurāṇa is combative, she's formidable, and she's almost always deadly. But her immense power is consistently exercised under masculine authority, and it's serving to bolster the dominance of the male gods within the Brahmanical religious order. So she's she can be erotic, but she's also terrifying, and sometimes her depictions are also aged, and these all are kind of marking her as a liminal figure. And she's potent, but positioned at the margins. She has these alliances with male deities that occasionally are often unstable or uneasy, but these alliances are reinforcing her subordination to that kind of orthodox system. This dynamic in the text is really illustrating a crucial distinction between authority, meaning the right to command and be obeyed, and power, which is a capacity for decisive action, even without control over outcomes. So it's noted that in some instances, women will have considerable power in a patriarchal society, even if they have little or no authority. And this is the case that we see in the Devīpurāṇa's narrative world. So while the power of the feminine divine is quite undeniable in the text, the goddess is lacking a complete autonomy. She's lacking her freedom, the freedom to decide her own course of action. And this is a feature that occasionally gives rise to frictions between the goddess and her male interlocutors in quite interesting ways. The text is underscoring the goddess's power through vivid portrayals of her ferocity, through a consistent portrayal of her martial skill and that liminal status, while it's also binding her to male gods who summon her, who direct her, who command her. A central example of this is the longest and most intricate of those narrative arcs, which is a retelling of the slaying of the buffalo demon that had previously been relayed in the Devi Mahatmya. The basic frame of the Devīpurāṇa's version of the slaying of the buffalo demon narrative involves the rise to power of a demon named Kora, who, along with his sons Vajradanda and Kālī, is able to win all of the control over Earth, the heavens, and the netherworld, so kind of taken over all of the cosmic order. And this is a feat he has been able to accomplish through a boon that had been granted by the god Vishnu. So now, in order to defeat the demon generals and to overcome the buffalo demon, so that they can restore the cosmic order, the displaced gods enlist the goddess and her manifestation so that they can harness female ferocity in battle. The goddess is invariably depicted as angry, hostile, and skilled in the deployment of weaponry throughout this episode. In successive battles, she's wrathfully defeating all of the demons, the Asuras, the Danavas, the Daityas, all of these various words for the demons, who threaten the established order of the cosmos. First, she slays the son Kālī with ease, cutting down his army and slicing him apart. And then in a subsequent clash, the second son, Vajradanda, incites her fury in battle, and she unleashes this terrifying arsenal and brings down that demon warrior and his surrounding forces. So now I just have some snippets of the translation, my translation of the text to sort of emphasize these images of the battlefield. Vajradanda launched 500 arrows at the goddess's bow. Seeing her bow shattered by them, the goddess was inflamed with the fire of rage. She released a weapon that was equal in splendor to a mighty storm cloud, thundering terribly and filling the 10 directions with lightning. It then rained down and washed away all the Danava army. Having destroyed his chariot and charioteer, as well as the staff bearing the umbrella and banner, the goddess slew the mighty and courageous Vajradanda with an arrow feathered with fragments of gold. In the final battle with Ghora, the buffalo demon himself, the vision of the goddess is one of terror and of might. That's quite comparable with the forces that will bring about the dissolution of the cosmos at the end of time. Ghora saw her, powerfully inflamed with fury like the dissolution fire, seated on the best of lions, creating fear in the Daitya Lord and allaying that of the chief of gods. All of the army of Ghora, its vicious form arisen through illusion, was hindered. The goddess threw the approaching Ghora to the ground and slit his throat with a sword. Throughout this battle, the goddess has this kind of frenzied laughter that's really underscoring an almost playful approach to battle, as she's really quite deftly cutting down all of these enemies and sending them to the realm of the dead. So her ferocity really is quite unmistakable, but always channeled in service of the gods and by the gods. This formidable power is further amplified through the goddess's manifestations as these 4 divine sisters, Jaya, Vijaya, Ajita, and Aparajita, whose names evoke feminized embodiments of victory, triumph, invincibility, and unconquerability, respectively. In combat, these goddesses prove indispensable. They're quite vicious in nature. They're masters of weaponry. They're quite fearsome opponents. But the text also frames them as dazzling young maidens. They're really these sort of paragons of idealized beauty. So we have, for example, the goddess Vijaya, when she approaches the battlefield, a single glance from her eyes is enough to strike down an asura who had become overcome with desire for her. This is a moment that entwines that erotic allure with quite lethal force. Embodied as a maiden, adorned with ornaments, opulent with the luster of various gifts, the goddess began to frolic with other youthful girls. A mighty Danava warrior named Durmukha was dispatched to the head of the army, and the goddess Vijaya also arrived there for the sake of play. Having seen her, the mind of the Daitya leader was afflicted with desire, and he extended his hand to her. When the goddess glanced at him, that sinner fell to the ground, lifeless. Vijaya then approached the goddess Sandhya, the original principal, and explained, "O goddess, a Danava came, possessed by desire for me. I became so angry that when I looked at him, he died." The portrayal of Vijaya here is highlighting both the delicate allure and the deadly power of these 4 divine sisters. So they might appear as innocuous, they might appear as these delicate young women, but that feminine allure is really accompanied by a corresponding feminine power that can become quite dangerous when it's unleashed. So by linking eroticized visions of the feminine divine with this quite brutal martial strength, the text is casting orthodox ideals of female beauty as quite compatible with the emerging figure of a martial goddess. The gentle forms of the feminine divine are thereby connected with the vigor of these more fearsome manifestations, with their gentle beauty overlaying an uncompromising ferocity. And the text clearly and plainly states this: "She who bears a beautiful, peaceful form also manifests as a frightful slayer of the god's enemies." This merging of that kind of Vedic mother image with the demoniac non-orthodox goddess emphasizes the effectiveness of this duality. But for all of this terrifying power, the goddess of the Devīpurāṇa doesn't control it herself. This strength is deployed by others, consistently directed toward advancing the aims of the male gods. In setting out for the battles, the text makes clear that the goddess is sent in service of the god's welfare, and this really pervades the narratives, making apparent the subjection of the feminine divine to the desires of these male others, regardless of how powerful she is and how prominent she might be. She might be the real, complete embodiment of power, but she's not the authoritative wielder of that power. She's repeatedly positioned in a subtle subordination to male control. Usually that's under the control of the god Shiva. So, for example, when the gods wish to proposition the goddess for her assistance in defeating Ghora, the buffalo demon, and all of his asura forces, They don't actually go to the goddess to ask for her help directly. Instead, they first appeal to Shiva. So they go to Shiva, ask for his help, and then he summons the consort and he compels her to act. The text makes this clear, stating by the command of Shambhu, she appeared in manifest form along with Jaya and the rest. Similarly, there's another narrative episode in which the demon Ruru threatens the gods' cosmic control. And here again, the gods go and praise Shiva and prompt a terrible form of the goddess to emerge from the wrath of Shiva. And this manifestation of the goddess from Shiva is then eager to fulfill his command. Frightening all the directions, she came before the Lord of Gods, Shambhu, and said, "What shall I do? O Lord of Gods, tell me quickly." The unconquered Aparajita was addressed by the pleased god. "If you are lovingly devoted to me, O goddess, you must attack Ruru." She replied, "O Lord of Gods, I will do as you have spoken." Then Shambhu created a great ocean of wine. He said, "Drink this along with the other Shaktis and come under the control of anger." These passages are making clear that the goddess is really operating at the beck and call of masculine divine forces. She's appearing when she's summoned, she's respectfully requesting instruction, and then she's channeling that immense power that she has in service of the gods. Yet this kind of deferential posture isn't constant throughout the text, which I think is really fascinating. The goddess occasionally reveals a defiant streak in these narratives, lashing out when she's scorned or when she's commanded to act against her will. And so this tension between the power and authority is surfacing most vividly in an episode involving an Asura who manifests before Shiva and the goddess when she's manifest as Uma along with Shiva. This is prior to the buffalo demon Gora being manifest on Earth. And Uma here is cursing that demon to be reborn on Earth as that buffalo demon Gora. Shiva then interprets this as a strategic misstep that's strengthening this enemy. He can kind of foresee that Gora is going to become too powerful, and he reprimands the goddess quite sharply, and he calls her a, quote, foolish girl, and he attributes this act that she's done to what he calls a, quote, capricious woman's nature. So the goddess becomes quite enraged by these words, and she retaliates, and she grants this demon excessive power, and she thereby turns this little quarrel into a complete cosmic crisis. Thus addressed by Shambhu, the goddess was angered. She then spoke to that Asura, "Having become the best of my devotees, you will conquer all the gods. You will be supreme with an all-pervading nature, unable to be slain. Having become commander of the 7 continents of earth, the 7 netherworlds, as well as heaven, you will be invincible." So here, this very sort of capricious goddess is pushing back against male authority, and she's using her divine power to elevate the Asura and to challenge Brahmanical control. And this rebellion is threatening the very cosmic order itself. But this defiance is very swiftly curtailed in the text. Shiva then responds with a counter curse, and he decrees that the goddess is also going to take an earthly form, and she's going to go marry that demon lord, once again binding her power to a male authority. So the goddess is quite powerful here. She's recognized as divine power incarnate, but she's not in control of that power, and she's really subject to the exploits of the male divine world and this kind of patriarchal orthodox vision that the Purana is coming to support. This power-authority tension is further developed through the text's treatment of the Shaktis. Shakti is a Sanskrit word meaning power, but it also comes to refer to an innate feminine divine power that's inherent in beings. And we have a sculptural example here of the Shaktis who come to be seen as these sort of feminine versions of male deities. They carry the same kind of accompaniments, they have the same vehicles, all of that. So while goddesses had been tied to the male gods as wives or companions, the Shaktis are more than that. They're really female counterparts who fully animate and complete their male correlates. So feminine power here becomes a constituent element of male divinity. It's internalized and it's essential, but also subject to the male direction. The Devīpurāṇa is continuing to build on the concept of the female Shaktis as fundamental to male identity, and it's demonstrating that the invigorating power of the feminine inhabits the male form, and it can be conjured for worldly successes. I like the text also refers to the Shaktis as rays, Marichi, which is really emphasizing that these goddesses have an unlimited capacity as condensed energy. Though the text continues to posit them as governed by male directions. So they're frequently called forth in battle because they're so ferocious and because they're so potent, but they act only once they're being compelled by their male counterparts. For example, we have an episode where Brahma is part of a battle with the other gods, a battle between the other gods and the Asuras, and he's fearing that they're going to lose to the demons. And his solution is to summon his own female counterpart. This is a literal externalization of his inner feminine power. Having taken on the form of a woman, I will assist Maheshvara. Then Brahma generated his own Shakti. That goddess was luminous like sunbeams. In one hand was a water pot, and in the other was a bow. Though one, she was established in crores of manifestations, bearing all the weapons. They killed but were not struck. They felled Asuras by the thousands. Though bearing the form of Brahma, her body appeared as that of a woman. She was mounted on the goose vehicle and was bearing her own appropriate weapons. Threatening, she terrified the floods of Danavas. This passage is presenting a real striking fusion of masculine authority and feminine power. So Brahma is identified here by his classic attributes, that the water pot and the goose vehicle, but he's appearing in a form that's emphatically female. This transformation, however, is not erasing his masculine identity, but rather imbuing it with this potent feminine Shakti. And it's allowing him to harness that feminine energy and to reverse the course of battle through it. Witnessing the effectiveness of this act in battle, the other gods, Shiva, Kartikeya, Vishnu, Yama, and Indra, invoke their own feminine energies. As the text describes it, they focus on the radiant beings within the lotus of their hearts, and they bring forth these female counterparts who then, because they're so ferocious, are able to defeat the Asura forces. So again, here the feminine embodies the raw power itself, while the feminine remains the structure through which the power is being asserted. In this way, the feminine potency remains immense, it remains indispensable, but it's not autonomous. It's consistently being directed, constrained, and instrumentalized. This episode is highlighting a broader shift in how masculine authority and feminine power are imagined. So unlike the Devī Mahatmya, which doesn't attribute Shaktis solely to male vehicles, the Devīpurāṇa never depicts Shaktis emerging from the goddess herself. So in the Devī Mahatmya's version of events, a prominent narrative in which the Shaktis are emerging. After all of the other Shaktis emerge from the gods, a very gruesome and terrifying Shakti of the goddess Chandika also manifests yelping like 100 jackals. And then that terrifying goddess commands Shiva to act as her messenger. And here I just have an image of the Shaktis going into battle. And you see that central figure, that's that kind of terrifying goddess in the Devī Mahatmya, who is emerging from another goddess, Chandika. So in the Devī Mahatmya's version, even the grammar is underscoring the goddess's authority. So Shiva here addresses that goddess in a deferential third-person passive, Hanyatam asura shigram, let the demons be quickly slain, while the goddess responds with a very abrupt, commanding second-person imperative, Dutatvam gacha bhagvan, go be a messenger. The relationship here is hierarchical, with Shiva standing subject to the goddess's power. By contrast, the Devīpurāṇa substitutes a terrible form of the god Kālī for the goddess Chandika as the vehicle for that final fearsome Shakti. So rather than the Shakti emerging from Chandika, she is emerging from Kālī. And this substitution is really shifting that ultimate authority to a male figure rather than allowing any kind of authority of a female figure. So where Chandika's Shakti issued commands to Shiva, the Devīpurāṇa's version of the Shakti awaits direction from Shiva. Both texts are acknowledging that the Shaktis are quite formidable, but only the Devī Mahatmya is really granting them any sort of autonomous agency. Across these narratives, from the Devī Mahatmya to the Devīpurāṇa, we encounter both an ongoing celebration of feminine power and a growing concern with controlling it through masculine structures. This trajectory of increasing domestication is reinforced by subsequent narrative developments in later Śākta Purāṇa texts. For instance, the Kālī Purāṇa, likely composed in 10th or 11th century Assam, adopts the figure of Kālī, who had been characterized as terrifying and grotesque in the earlier Devī Mahatmya and Devīpurāṇa, but recasts her in more conventional and maternal terms. The late medieval Devīpurāṇa is also advocating for the goddess's preeminent status, even while it's denigrating what it perceives to be a kind of base female nature of the various divine embodiments. So the goddess of these texts might be supreme, but the femininity is not valued nor empowered as it is in other Śākta texts. So positioned amidst these texts, the Devīpurāṇa is really starting to reveal an important transitional moment, one in which the feminine divine remains quite powerful, yet increasingly mediated through a masculine authority. So I want to just briefly look a little bit more closely at these later Śākta works to trace how the characterization of the goddess is changing a little bit over time. A striking narrative that appears in these later texts, but is absent from both the Devī Mahatmya and the Devīpurāṇa, is the Daksha cycle of myths, which become quite central across much of the Puranic tradition. They're quite prevalent in many other Puranas. In the Kālī Purāṇa, for example, much of the narrative is really focused on the goddess as Sati, the daughter of Daksha and the first wife of Shiva, as well as on her reincarnation as the second wife of Shiva, Parvati, after Daksha's sacrifice. So here in the Kālī Purāṇa, Daksha, one of Brahma's mind-born sons, is compelled by his father to solicit the goddess Mahamaya, urging her to take birth as his daughter in order to incite Shiva's desire. So unlike the martial figure of the Devīpurāṇa, the goddess of the Kālī Purāṇa is valued for a kind of erotic power. When Daksha petitions, "O Jagadmayi Mahamaya, if you are pleased to grant me a boon, then be born as my daughter and consort of Shiva." The goddess then complies, and she takes birth as Sati, whose name is commensurate with virtue and righteousness within a orthodox dharmic framework. The text is also explicitly conflating Kālī with Sati and Sati's subsequent reincarnation as Shiva's second wife, Parvati. So after Sati abandons her body in response to Daksha's insult to Shiva, the narrative describes how Kālī enters the womb of Menaka to be reborn as Parvati. And in this way, the fierce, independent Kālī of the earlier text is being recast and it's being domesticated in these more maternal terms. So where the Kālī of other texts once drank blood on the battlefield, the Kālī of the Kālī Purāṇa is being cast as this kind of modest young maiden who is propitiating Shiva, and with the help of the god Kama, desire, is able to sort of incite desire in this famously ascetic and celibate god, thereby ensuring the birth of their son, who's going to rise and defeat the Asuras who become a threat. So in the Kālī Purāṇa, the goddess isn't being depicted so much as a warrior herself, that this vision that had been so pervasive in the Devī Mahatmya and Devīpurāṇa, but rather she's being positioned as an erotic figure. She's not slaying the demons, but rather serving as the mother of the slayer of demons. And her power is being reframed through fertility rather than through the kind of martial prowess. Turning to the Devīpurāṇa, we encounter a real noticeable shift in how the goddess is conceptualized. So here the text is less invested in emphasizing a kind of gendered embodied feminine power, and it's instead really elevating the goddess as an abstract, genderless, supreme absolute. There are these kind of manifestations of goddesses, little g goddesses, throughout the text, but they're often appearing in an unflattering light. They're portrayed as petty, jealous, manipulative, rather than being the embodiment of some kind of real divine potency. Although the Devī Bhagavata incorporates the shared war narratives from earlier texts, so as I had mentioned early on, the Devī Bhagavata Purāṇa retells the Devī Mahatmya twice in its own text. But these iterations are including narrative additions that subtly diminish the notion of inherent female power. You have that slaying of the buffalo demon narrative, for example, but here the text is stressing that the goddess is summoned to fight only because of a boon that had been granted by the Asuras, or granted to the Asuras by Brahma. So Brahma had stipulated that the asuras could only ever be slain as a woman. This was a provision that they had requested because they assumed that no woman could ever defeat them. This was a safeguard for them. But the goddess of the Devī Purāṇa becomes a warrior because it's very contingent on the circumstances rather than some kind of innate feminine might. This is a real departure from the Devī Mahatmya and the Devīpurāṇa, both of which are really celebrating womanhood as intrinsically powerful. So in the Devī Bhagavata, though, we have a suggestion that masculinity is really the normative locus of power, while womanhood becomes this kind of temporary vehicle because of the dictates of this boon. This view is made particularly explicit when the goddess rebukes the buffalo demon's minister when he addresses her as a woman. He calls her a woman, and she kind of chastises him and explains that she's not actually a woman. She is the supreme Purusha, this kind of abstract principle, spirit, universal spirit, who's merely assuming this female form to meet the dictates of this boon, to fulfill this task, so that she can slay the asuras. The text, by emphasizing the complete transcendence of gender, is then kind of sidestepping this idea that femininity itself is carrying power while still acknowledging the goddess's divine capabilities. Considered within this broader intertextual framework, the Devīpurāṇa's emphasis on the Shiva-Shakti model stands out clearly, this kind of connection of Shiva and Shakti. The feminine is recognized as potent, but that potency is consistently harnessed for male purposes and is controlled by male agents. This is really reflecting a tantric orientation. The Devīpurāṇa is composed at a time and in a region where tantra is arising, and so the text is bringing some of that in, and it's foregrounding the productive union of masculine and feminine forces. And it's presenting the goddess as an inseparable aspect of Shiva and as the animating Shakti within male divinity. You have these representations, pictorial representations here, where Ardhanarishvara, where it's the deity is half Shiva, half goddess, or you have this kind of representation of the goddess really being sort of at the heart of Shiva, innate within Shiva. This repositioning of the goddess contributes to an ongoing process of domestication. By associating the goddess so closely with Shiva, the Devīpurāṇa is adopting those well-established narrative motifs that have been previously formed, while also reshaping them to fit this kind of more controlled and Brahmanically inflected vision of the feminine divine. Through these developments, the goddess is gradually transformed from a kind of autonomous, ferocious figure into a dutiful wife and a nurturing mother. So this is really kind of revealing a crucial step in the evolving Śākta imagination. The text stages the negotiation between the local goddesses and the Orthodox quite vividly, with those fierce matrikas, the matrikas we mentioned at the very beginning, being transformed into those controlled Shaktis of the male gods, the conflation of the matrikas with the Shaktis, while the independent goddess of the Vindhyas, the Vindhya mountains, is being merged with the more wifely and maternal vision of Parvati of the Himalayas, who becomes an inherent and secondary portion of Shiva. You have this image of this kind of domestic portrait of the goddess now with Shiva, with the child, with their son Ganesha there, kind of having this home life. So intertextual comparison is revealing this subjugation as part of a larger trajectory across the Śākta literature, where the goddess of the Devī Mahatmya is really standing as autonomous and commanding and as martial. She's increasingly rendered in the later texts as subject to patriarchal structures of orthodoxy. So taking this intertextual analysis really is demonstrating how remarkably variable the goddess can be, how she becomes shaped across time, how she's influenced by place, and shaped by tradition to serve differing ends, differing social, theological, or political ends. But she's enduring as an evolving symbol. She's reflecting the aspirations of those who revere her rather than serving as this embodying a fixed, immutable essence. So to close, I just want to offer this devotional poem by the renowned 18th, 19th century poet Kamalakanta Bhattacharya, whose words I think beautifully capture the goddess's shifting, adaptive nature. Who is this, dressed like a crazy woman, robed with the sky? Whom does she belong to? She has let down her hair, thrown off her clothes, strung human hands around her waist, and taken a sword in her hand. Her face sparkles from the reflection of her teeth, and her tongue lolls out. The smile on that moon face drips heaps and heaps of nectar. Mother, are you going to rescue Kamalakanta in this outfit? So as Kamalakanta's verses remind us, the goddess is never static. Her garments, her forms, her temperaments, these are all reflecting the particular concerns and desires of the communities that are calling upon her. So if she doesn't rescue us in this form, perhaps she'll adopt another and rescue us with the next form. And with that, I will end. Thanks so much for listening, and happy to chat and try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for this very thorough and kind of detailed analysis from several Puranic texts. And this is the time for Q&A. So if you have a question, please raise your hand or type it in the chat box. Yes, Maureen, please go ahead.
Yeah, so Jeff, I can't even begin to understand all of the things that you understand about this, but I am curious how you got interested in Indian mythology. I'm also a UVA grad, but not from religious studies, from education. So.
Sure, it's been quite meandering journey. I became interested in religious studies as an undergraduate. I studied abroad in India. And that's kind of when I started pursuing that. I was interested in issues of gender. When I started a Sanskrit course, I just was immediately obsessed with it. It was such a fun, I don't know, Sanskrit is such a fun puzzle. So, and then also drawn to mythologies. So all of these interests kind of converged into this focus on goddess traditions. And I did a Sanskrit reading course on the Devī Mahatmya early on in my studies, and that text is amazing and gorgeous, and like I just really got hung up on it, and then started looking around at other Śākta Purāṇas, and came across the Devīpurāṇa, which I thought very interesting. It was traditionally, it has had impact on for understandings and for practice, but hadn't been very thoroughly studied. So that's how I got into the work. And then, as I said, these same kinds of narratives are being incorporated. So as I'm starting to read the Devīpurāṇa, finding that many of the narratives are quite similar to the Devī Mahatmya's version, but then reframing them, I got curious about what that reframing might tell us.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Maureen. Anybody else who has? Yes, Professor Papu, please go ahead.
Yeah. Can you see me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can
okay,
see you
okay.
now. We have spotlighted you also.
Not directly related to your excellent presentation of the feminine divine phenomena. A couple of questions. Once, a long time ago, I read a book by Rajeshwari Sundararajan. She says the feminine goddess is the starting of the modern feminism in the Hindu tradition. That's one thing. A second thing is, in my casual conversation with Ludorf and Rosanna Roche, we used to meet very frequently in the AAS meetings. And in fact, so that the sexual aspects of that one, for example, she presented a wonderful paper on the sexual themes in the Puranas and so on. Anyway, she casually mentioned to me, if you see all the gods and goddesses, you see like Sita Rama, not Rama Sita. Okay. Likewise, if you take all the goddesses, say Radha Krishna, not Krishna Radha, Bharya Bharta, not Bharta Bharya, So that in the literature, as we speak, and there is always the female name comes first, and the male name comes later on. Yeah, Roseanne told me that I don't know why it happened, but anyway, it's a very interesting fact to see how the female comes first, and also in the South Indian tradition, when the newlyweds enter the house, they will ask first the wife to put her foot on the no, the husband is always followed by that. Yeah, some casual remarks, I was mentioning. So anyway, the point is, in the tradition that we are talking about, can we say that some aspect of feminism dominated the Indian thought at some point of time, so that it is always the worship of the mother, but we don't really, the masculine figure is always, mata pita, not pita mata, that's how the whole Sanskrit tradition goes, in language. Some random questions, I was just asking you.
No, I've never thought about that observation of the female name
Roseanne
first.
told me
That's
that one.
that's very
You mentioned
interesting.
that,
Yeah, that I'll have to make note of that now. Yeah, the question about feminism is quite complex and rich, and I don't think it has a clear answer. There's a great book, a series of articles, Is the Goddess Feminist or something, title something along those lines. And yes and no. I mean, it depends on who is what the context is, and who the worshipers are, and who the framers are, and how the goddess is serving them, or how they're considering the goddess. I think there's a lot of potential there, and I think that historically, I'm sure there are facets of these goddess narratives that are being that are representative of a kind of feminist streak. But it can be hard to know. One article in that book I mentioned, Is the Goddess a Feminist, is talking about the image of Kālī, and this image that can frequently be read by people as being quite feminist, where Kālī, she's on the battlefield, she's vicious, she's fighting, and then she's standing on top of Shiva. He's laid down in front of her, and she's standing on top of him. And many people will read that as being very, the woman is in power, and the woman is controlling, and it's this very feminist message. But when the scholar was doing some field work and asking people, I forget where exactly in southern India, asking women to read the narrative or read the image, they're reading it more as a vision of embarrassment. They say that Kālī is sticking her tongue out and biting her tongue because she's so embarrassed she stepped on her husband Shiva. So I find this just a really fascinating sort of demonstration of how that same image, that same vision, can be read in such strikingly distinct ways. So it's hard to sort of break out of our own lens sometimes and be able to tell historically, was this demonstrative of some kind of feminist vision in the past? But I do think there's threads there. It's difficult to tease that out. But certainly we can revision for our modern purposes and try to reconstruct or try to view the goddess in ways that support feminist visions today.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other question for Jeff?
I have a quick question, Jeff.
Go ahead, Balaji.
So, just wonderful elucidation of the Puranas. I remember my mother telling me, Bela, don't read the Purana, read the Vedas, She always felt that there were too many rituals in there. But the aspect that you bring to the table today is something so unique. And it's very clear that you have great knowledge on this subject. And I can't even touch that because, I haven't read as much. But I do have a question, and that is, why is it that in the Rig Veda or the Veda, the earlier Vedas, we have this a sense of feminine energy, in such a positive way, but not so much as you elucidated today in the Purana. The Śākta Purāṇa is the one that you talked about today. So why did that happen? Was there a change, a change in societal norms because of which this happened? I was just curious to know.
Yeah, so I mean, basically all I can do is surmise, but my one thing that I find very interesting about the Puranas is that they are, as I mentioned previously, sort of the nexus of the orthodox and the popular. And I like the Puranas because they're elite, they're Sanskritic, but they're also sort of base. They're popular. They're like drawing in popular culture, but then making it palatable to this kind of more elite audience as well. And it's, I think, demonstrating societal interaction, and placed within the context, specifically if we're talking about the Śākta Purāṇas, so looking at Bengal, the time period when they're being composed is when Brahmanical religion is spreading into that region. There, if we look at the material record, there's copper plates indicating that that kings are giving large tracts of land to Brahmins coming into the region. So kind of spreading this more Veda-based religion, but then coming into contact with peoples who are already in the region who might have all of these, who might be worshiping these very local goddesses. We still see like Grama Devtas today, these goddesses who are quite ferocious. They're like these village goddesses, those sorts of figures that are then brought into this kind of Brahmanical practice in order to bring those people into the Brahmanical religion itself. So kind of this spreading, this spreading social religious structure, then entering new regions, coming across new religious entities, religious practices, and then kind of trying to reframe them within the Orthodox structure so that they can kind of say, well, you people that we're just meeting, you're also part of our religious group. We just have to, reframe it in this way. So that's why you do continue to see those Vedic instances and those Vedic kind of ideals, but sort of framed in these new ways and ways that are connecting the prior Vedic thought with this new influence. And that's made really explicit with the Devī Mahatmya, where you have the terrible, terrifying goddess, but then using very, very Vedic language, very Vedic epithets to name the goddess and make those equations and say, going back to the Vedas, we had that entity, that philosophical concept, that whatever, and that Vedic thing is this terrible goddess that we're now talking about. So really demonstrating this equation and bringing these things together. So it is demonstrating, I think, a social shift and social changes. And I think that's why we see, too, this increasing domestication, because it's sort of bringing it back, not exactly full circle, but you start out with that kind of Vedic, more motherly vision of the goddess. Then Devī Mahatmya is like, bam, we have this, like, all of a sudden we have this very, very vicious goddess coming onto the scene of Sanskrit literature, and then a continual kind of softening of that to go back to, or to make commensurate that vision with those Vedic norms.
Thank you. You have definitely done a lot of study on this, and it's very intriguing. I was fascinated by your talk today. So thank you for that. Yeah,
of course. Thank you. I'm glad to have the opportunity to return to this. I haven't been thinking about this research for a little while, so I'm glad to kind of delve back into it and prompt me a little bit.
Great, great. So Jeff, if I could just pick up on the answer that you gave to Professor Pappu a few moments ago, the question I have is, why should we kind of look at it in binary terms. In other words, when you say Kālī is so powerful, and yet she is a little embarrassed, I don't really see any contradiction as such in it. Similarly, when you cited the Sati story, I mean, when we have this Durgā Puja, one of the what is called the Mool mantra is Daksha Yajna Vinashinyai. So she is very powerful in that she is destroying this yajna by her father, and yet it is because Shiva was uninvited. So why would we kind of look at it as either or?
No, it's not. No, I agree. I think it becomes more complex. I think more it's about looking at the textual evolution where it started out as more binary. And I think over time, it does become less so, and it becomes more complicated. And all of these kinds of visions are merging together. So definitely agree with you there that it's not so much. It subsequently becomes not so much an either or, but rather all of and above. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thank you so much, Jeff. Last chance. Any questions? I don't see any in the chat box. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for this wonderful illuminating talk. We have recorded it and we will put it up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days, and then we'll send you the link. For our regular listeners, unfortunately, I don't have the date for our next seminar. It will be in November, but Belaji and I have been kind of trying to get the final details about the speaker. So please stay tuned. We will definitely send you via our email list. So with that, thank you so much. Again, happy Diwali, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Jeff.
Thank you. Bye.